DRB and one of the co-chairs with my co-chair Rose Wilcher and from FHI 360. And I'm going to turn it over to her. But first, I wanted to tell you very important things like the bathroom keys are in the basket on the back, and there are signs that will guide you through the maze. We have one other announcement. We have a brand new, after a few years, IGWG website, which was soft launched yesterday, and we still are going to be making some necessary adjustments. I'm sure there are some broken links, but if you have anything that you find is not easily findable on there, please email either myself or Nicole LeBron. I'm sure you have all of our emails, but if not, see me afterwards and I'll give it to you. Also, once we're finished, I'll make sure to get the PowerPoints uploaded to the IGWG website so you can have access to all of this. Oh, and we filled it in the front nicely, I hope, because we have some photos being taken, et cetera, et cetera. So, Rose, you want to take over and moderate us through this wonderful account?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. So, welcome to the second event this year to be hosted by the Interagency Gender Working Group's Gender-Based Task Force. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rose Wilcher. I'm the Director of Research Utilization at FHI 360. And as Charlotte mentioned, I'm also the co-chair of the GBB Task Force with her. This is my first year serving in the co-chair role, so I'm a bit of a novice to this role, but it is a lot of fun. And this is also the first event that I've been able to attend in person, because I'm not based here in DC. I'm in FHI 360's office in North Carolina. So I'm really excited to be here in person for this event today, which is going to focus on new ways in which technology is being used to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. Now, 3 years ago, I am told, the GBB Task Force hosted an event on this same topic, and apparently it was very well received, very popular, a standing room only type of event. And so when we were brainstorming a little while ago about potential topics for the GBB Task Force to host this year, we thought it might be a good time to revisit this topic, because when we're talking about technological innovations, 3 years is basically an eternity. So a lot can change in that time. New digital health innovations are emerging all the time to address a variety of health issues and health system challenges, and gender-based violence is no exception. So with the speakers we've lined up for you today, which all three of whom I'm very excited to have here with us, we're going to hear about some of the new and different ways in which technology, including mobile phones, is being used to address GBV, and hopefully have some lively discussion about it, and hopefully also learn a bit about how their work is or will be contributing to an ever-expanding evidence base around digital health. So we're really excited about this event today. Just a couple of things about the sequence of events. So one of our speakers is joining us remotely from India. It's a little bit late there, and so we're going to have her go first, and then we're going to have some Q&A with her. And then if she wants to dial off and go to bed, we're going to allow her to do that. And then we'll proceed with the other two speakers and have some Q&A following their presentations. We have a nice full room here today, but I think we also have a number of participants joining us remotely. So during the Q&A, we'll make sure we pause to see if we have questions coming in from them. Otherwise, are there any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and get going. Hopefully the technology gods are on our side this morning. Let me just do a quick check. So ElsaMarie, can you hear me okay? Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so let me quickly introduce for you ElsaMarie De Silva. She is the founder and CEO of Red Dot Foundation, also known as Safecity, which is a platform that crowdsources personal experiences of sexual violence and abuse in public spaces. Since Safecity started in December 2012, it has become the largest crowd map on the issue in India, Cameroon, and Nepal, and I think they've since expanded to other countries as well. ElsaMarie is a very accomplished professional and has received more awards than I can name here. They're written there in her bio. But I do want to mention that she was recently awarded the Global Leadership Award by Vital Voices, which is really impressive. And prior to Safecity, ElsaMarie was in the aviation industry for 20 years, where she worked with Jet Airways and Kingfisher Airlines. So she brings quite a diverse background to this work we're going to hear about today. So Elsa, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Charlotte. I'm really happy to be here, and it has been raining really heavily, and I've been keeping my fingers crossed that the internet stays well. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I believe it's a full room. So without ado, I was in aviation for almost 18 years, and in the year 2012, I went through this personal moment where I was looking for my purpose and I wanted to move to the social sector and work on women's issues. But I was not really sure of what I wanted to do or how I was going to do it. Till in December 2012, we had this horrific incident where a young woman, Jyoti Singh, was gang raped on a bus in Delhi. It did make international news, but in my country also it was a very shocking incident. For the first time in my memory, we had people talking about it openly, and I realized that a lot of my friends, in fact all of them, had a story to share. And I was reliving memories of my own. And I thought, you know, why did it take such an incident to bring this out into the open? And I started to think a little more deeply about this issue, started researching on the internet and going through various websites, and I came across the UN Women statistics, which I'm sure you are all familiar with, which says that sexual violence is a global pandemic. It affects 1 in 3 women around the world at least once in their lifetime. Most of this occurs before they reach the age of 16, and yet most of us, that's 80%, choose not to talk about it officially. And when I looked at the India statistics, they were not any better. This was a study done on behalf of UN Women in 2012, a little before the rape. And it said that 75% of women and girls face sexual violence in their own neighborhoods. 9 out of 10 of them experience being groped, stalked, or sexually assaulted in a public space. And about 65% of them felt extremely fearful to go out alone at night. And this, you know, was quite disturbing to me because I am a single woman. I have traveled extensively all over the world for work and for leisure, and to me, going out and being fearful in a public space, whether in the day or the night, was a problem which I felt that no woman should have to experience. And on the other hand, the study also showed that men, half of the men admitted that they had been violent with a woman in a public space. 3 out of 4 of them agreed that women provoked the incident by the way they dressed, and 2 out of 5 of the men interviewed said that women who moved around deserve to be sexually harassed. And as I dug deeper, I realized that, you know, we had a problem on our hands because a lot of people did not understand the whole spectrum of sexual violence. We were thinking of it as the most extreme form, which is sexual assault and rape, when on a daily basis, we were ignoring the verbal and the non-verbal forms of it, you know, right from staring, ogling, indecent gestures and masturbation in public spaces to commenting, catcalls, talking, groping, touching. All of this was happening daily, but we thought it was too trivial to even talk about it, to make a complaint, or to raise our voice. And whilst we thought it was too trivial, it actually is quite debilitating to many, limiting their choices, movements, and affecting their mental health. And you know, to me, honestly, during this whole incident around the gang rape, I relived one particular memory that stood out in my life when I was 13 years old on a train in where I was groped. And post that, I, in fact, stopped traveling by train because I hated it so much. So I thought, okay, what can I do? I want to be part of the solution. I don't want to just protest against the, rape and the violence in India. I want to do something concrete. And I had heard at that time about HarassMap Egypt. And I said, okay, what if we were to replicate this platform in India? So we launched Safecity, which is a crowd map. We asked people to anonymously share their stories. We are interested in what happened, where it happened, the date and time. And these are then aggregated as location-based trends and visualized on a map as hotspots. And the idea was to make this information available in the public domain so that people could do something about it. So for example, today if it's very underreported, it doesn't make official statistics and therefore in a way makes the problem invisible. And our aim is to make it visible by putting it on a map, making the information available for anyone to use. As an individual, I could increase my personal situational awareness, and as a community, I could use it to solve my local neighborhood problems. So the crowd map currently is on the web application. You go to our website, safecity.in. You can put in your report, and you can zoom in right up to the street level. This is some of the data for Delhi. The report is very easy to use. You click on it, you fill in the location, you put in a title, you put in a little bit of description, pick a date and time, pick a category. You can leave your name and email, but it's optional and it doesn't show up on the front end. You can read other people's reports, and we found that reading people's reports actually helps you, find solutions as well as encourages you to seek help. You can query the data based on the date range. You can sign up, also pick the category and query the data accordingly. And we found that a lot of people were commenting on these reports, sharing tips on how they dealt with a similar situation. We found that a lot of women were sharing stories that were over 20 years old, which you can imagine that they were carrying this emotional baggage for so many years. And a lot of these stories are in great detail. We find that sharing your report helps another person also break their silence and hopefully seek the help that they need. It's the first step towards acknowledging that something wrong has been done to you. So why did I think this solution works? Because, once I made that career switch, I wanted to give myself a year to figure out, was I adding value, or if I wasn't adding value, I would, go back to a corporate job. And so I with an organization that was working in a community to mobilize and organize themselves around an issue. And the data that we collected actually showed that there was petty robbery, not so much sexual harassment in that neighborhood, but it was petty robbery. And we were able to actually get the community together. We did a lot of awareness workshops for them, using resources from within the community, like know your rights, know how to file a right to information application, where you seek for information from official sources like the police. Unlike the US and India, we don't have open data yet. And we also presented this information to not just the community, but also the police. And we found that they changed their beat patrol timings. So in this world today, where we constantly use peer review sites like TripAdvisor to plan a holiday, we use Yelp or Zomato in my country to pick a restaurant to eat at, and several other Goodreads to read a book or whatever it is, we depend on our peers to tell us or guide us in decision making. But when it comes to public safety or personal safety, there is no information available. Even if in my country, were I to file a right to information application at the police station, I'd have to do it for one at every police station. And when I did get the data, it would not be at the street level. So it would be statistics that I couldn't really use to make better choices for my own safety. But with Safe Cities data, I can look at a street corner, and if there are reports, I can decide what is the best course of action. Not that I want to limit people in their movements, but knowing that this could be an issue, I might have my pepper spray more handy. I could have my mobile phone fully charged with the SOS app ready. We are not in the SOS space. We are in the preemptive space where we're trying to find trends based on historical perspectives. But we could also, as a community, find local solutions. Now that we have data, which is information and power, can we rally our neighbors around the issue, and can we find better solutions? So for example, in Kibera, our partner in Kenya, Kibera is a big slum in Kenya, one of the hotspots was near a mosque, and the boys would push the girls going to school against a wall and grope them. And it was so disturbing that many of those girls didn't really want to go to school. And as you know, in low-income communities, it's very easy for them to drop out of school. So my partner, Jane Anyango, invited the imam to a meeting. She presented the data. He started preaching it in his sermons. And there was an immediate change in how those boys behaved in the community. We have several other stories which I will share with you. And then we work with the police as well, because for them it's a new data set which they don't have. I was told when I spoke at a security conference with police personnel, they acknowledged that women and girls are not going to go to their police station to make these complaints. So they were already scanning my crowd map for trends. And that's when I realized that, I should be sending them the dashboards and data sets on a monthly basis. This particular wall mural, I want to point out, is at a low-income community in Delhi. It's called Lal Kuwa. At the time, Plan India was running the Gender Resource Center. A Gender Resource Center is, community-based. It's a physical space where women and girls could access resources, government resources, where they could have legal help, etc. So we partnered with them, collected data in the community, and one of the hotspots turned out to be on this busy main road near a tea stall. Now, a tea stall in India is a kiosk where men would hang around. It's a male-dominated space. They would loiter whilst having their tea, but they would intimidate the women and girls by. And one of the things we do when we collect the data is to present the data collected to the community and ask them what is it that they would like to do with it. How would they like to change the situation? And the women and girls said they would like the staring and loitering to stop. Now, in a deeply patriarchal culture like ours, where it's difficult to confront a man, how do you do it? So we brainstormed a bit, and then we partnered with the Fearless Collective. They are an art-based group. They did a workshop, and they, with the girls, they designed this wall mural. It's a large one. This is part of it. It has staring eyes, and it has subtle messaging woven into it saying, we will not hide, we will break our silence, we will speak up, look with your heart, not with your eyes. And this was so powerful that the staring and loitering actually stopped. In fact, a journalist went to document it, and she asked the tea stall owner, who now had a fruit stall, do men loiter here? And he says, I just point to the wall and ask them to move on. So, I think a lot of the solutions need not necessarily involve police, but it definitely involves community. And we found art to be so powerful that we've used it in several places. This is at another gender resource center where Action India runs it, and this was at outside a public toilet. Now, in that community, they don't have toilets within their homes. So that's the only toilet these women have access to. They also don't go out and work. So for many of them, they don't have any other option. This public toilet turned out to be a hotspot because it didn't have, so when we analyzed why it was showing up as a hotspot, we realized that it didn't have windows, it didn't have doors, it didn't have proper lighting. And in addition to that, young men had placed a couch outside the toilet and would intimidate the women and girls, when they accessed it. They would also take MMS clips, and no one knew what they intended to do. So they would restrict their intake of water. They would not want to go to the toilet, or they would go early in the morning, late at night, which again made them vulnerable. So the women and girls decided to use art. This was by themselves, so you can see the difference in the art design, but it had the same effect. I mean, they were drawing their feelings on the wall, but in addition, they also put the sections of the law that made it a crime. And within 1 week, the couch disappeared. The boys, in fact, started advocating amongst their peers, and they joined the campaign to advocate for change. And these are just some of the stories, but we've worked across the world with several partners. In Kenya, we have the Polycom Development Project. In Nepal, we are with the Social Empowerment by Empowering Women group. They use the data to primarily confirm that transportation in Kathmandu was not adequate for women and that women were being harassed. Now, I don't know if you're familiar, but Kathmandu doesn't have normal transportation systems like other cities. Have many buses, and if it's meant for 25 people, 50 people would be crammed in it. So you can imagine the plight of the woman and how she would be groped and touched and commented upon. So yes, we collected the data. The data did prove that, and she was able to convince the transportation authorities to issue women-only bus licenses. We use campus ambassadors to work on their campuses, and we've had, again in Delhi, in and around the colleges, hotspots being identified. At one of the colleges, it was realized that there was not enough police vigilance, so they presented the data to the police, they increased their vigilance, and it changed. It became a little safer for them. We also use social media, and since this is ICT, I want to just spend a little time on our social media usage. We use Facebook and Twitter extensively. We use Twitter in a very different way. We have tweet chats, and our account is curated. We don't post it as Safecity. We invite other people to host the conversation on our behalf. And why we do that is because we realize that a lot of women and girls, and even men for that matter, are not fully familiar on the issue of sexual violence. They don't know the spectrum of violence. They don't know the laws or the legislations in their country, and therefore they don't know what their rights are. But and they are reluctant to talk about it from their own handle because of the taboo surrounding this issue. So when we invite them to come to our handle and talk about it, it takes away that fear of sharing their thoughts with the audience, because they are tweeting as Pin the Creep, which is our handle. And this allows them to talk about the issue from their perspective. So it could be gender and education, gender and child sex abuse, gender and legislation, gender and finance. But when we look at sexual violence, it cannot be in isolation. So it's important to broaden the conversation. And we found that this has helped us reach diverse audiences. It has helped us help people understand the issue more deeply and want to volunteer and take part in it. So what have we achieved so far? We've achieved over 10,000 reports, and this has come primarily through face-to-face interactions with people, through our workshops and through our on-the-ground campaigns. And why I'm highlighting this is because when I first started, I thought online is, you put out a platform over there and the reports would come flooding in. Yes, at the time they did come flooding in, but it was only a small percentage. And then I realized that a lot of people did not really understand. They did not think touching and groping is a crime. So they were not likely to report it. So we had to start educating people. And that's why we had this online, offline programs. We've done workshops for over 15,000 people, men and women. 40% of them are actually men and boys who've gone through our program. Because whilst we found that not all men are perpetrators, they are definitely silent bystanders. So how could we get them to intervene more deeply? We have worked in community-based organizations in neighborhoods across Delhi, Bombay, and now in Ahmedabad, another city in India. We also have partners in other countries in the world. And to give you an example, like in Cameroon, I believe there are not even laws. So hopefully this data set can inform policy, and hopefully they will have laws in the future that are strong. But data on the map really helps you look at the problem from a location perspective and trying to understand what is it about that location that makes it the comfort zone of the perpetrator. Can that be changed? Maybe it's got to do with infrastructure like lighting, or like in the case of the public toilets, better infrastructure like doors, windows. In one particular case, the hotspot was where women were using the bushes and were being attacked. And we realized, but there's a toilet in that community, except that the toilet was locked. So we presented the data to the municipal authorities and figured out that it was locked because nobody wanted to maintain and clean those toilets. And once you presented the data, the municipal authorities had no choice but to open up the toilets and promise to maintain and clean them. So with this data, you can actually hold people accountable in doing their jobs, whether they are the police who are supposed to provide security, municipal authorities that provide infrastructure, or elected representatives who have budgets for women's safety and don't really use it effectively. We've learned that you don't have to have fancy technology. All our technology is low cost. The crowdmap is on Ushahidi, which is an open source platform. However, to complement online, we had to go offline as well, and we found the same to be true in Kenya and Nepal too. And we believe in community engagement. If you give the community the tools, whether it is data, interpreting the data and facilitating solutions, facilitating the meetings with officials, you will find that a lot of, with very little money, but a lot of community engagement, you can have a lot of success. And I've also found that having this data in the public domain drives institutional accountability, even if you were not partnering with the police or other organizations. Currently, we are a web app. We also accept reports through social media and in India on a missed call. But our mobile app is under development. Currently, Android and iOS are under testing. So if any of you wish to integrate Safecity reporting into your existing work, please do get in touch with me. We are launching officially on the 21st of September on 2 US campuses in Denver, and we are asking our partners all over the world if they want to be part of this. And I'm happy to take any questions you may have. These are my coordinates.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Elsa, great presentation. Thank you very much. I mean, I think we would probably all agree that the data and crowdsourcing technology in and of itself is super interesting, but what was fascinating to me about that presentation is really about how useful those data are and the ability to use those data to spur individual behavior change, to use it as a mechanism for community engagement and mobilization, and that whole institutional accountability as well. That was fascinating, and so we want to open it up for Q&A with Elsa before she falls asleep. So the floor is open. Jeff, you're first. Elsa, we have mics moving around the room, so just if you don't hear anybody clearly, please just let us know.
Sure. Elsa, thank you. This is Jeff Jordan from PRB. Fabulous presentation and showing really how shedding light literally on an issue can help to change. I was really pleased to see some of the attention also to the behavior change aspects for the men themselves. One of my fears and an argument I get in with my young adult daughter all the time is whether she needs to be doing the behavior change or whether the behavior change needs to be coming from men, and where and how we deal with that with society. So, would love to hear further thoughts about not just shedding light and therefore allowing a greater increase in safe spots, but again, how you deal with behavior change among men and youth. And then the second piece was, have you talked to the business community? I mean, your comment earlier about looking at things like Travelocity or other kinds of places, it would seem to me, particularly in places where there is business or other kinds of things going on, that you could have business leaders who would be very upset if this is, you know, if the fear of stigma of being an unsafe place would drive business away, would drive other kinds of things away. So how do you get beyond that other aspect of community, beyond police, beyond the community work, which is, again, I wouldn't take away anything that you're doing. This is additive, but where and how do you consider bringing in the financial and the business community into it to see for them to be partners in this because it matters to their dollars? Thank you.
Okay, Elsa,
Absolutely. Yeah, those were great questions. So as for men, you know, in my country, if we are not talking about sexual violence, and if we don't have any education when we are in school and college, a lot of the men don't also understand the spectrum and don't also know what is appropriate or inappropriate and have never been challenged when they have behaved inappropriately. So I think the education piece is very critical, even from that sense, to do it more for them than for women. Women mainly to know their rights and to give them the tools to, you know, deal with it. But for men, to put them under the spotlight and not give them an opportunity to say that they didn't know that it was not okay. Having said that, a lot of men who have been involved in our work, okay, whether they've come in through the workshops or the social media or the campaigns on the ground, have been very instrumental in being part of the solution. And when they read the reports and when they see the data, they definitely want to do something. And that is why, you know, we focus on youth. We focus on, in our workshops, we don't limit or restrict it to only women and girls. We want everyone to be part of it, because unless you hear both sides or the men don't hear the women's stories, they're not going to fully understand the extent of the problem. We've had a lot of men say that they're now going to go back and educate their wives and girls on their rights, but they're also going to start talking to them about this issue, which I think is a great thing. I feel men also would pay attention to the data and, you know, the whole problem, right? If as a woman you experience it, when you share your story, you are often told it was you who caused the problem because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, wearing the wrong stuff, you said something, you were with someone who evoked it, etc. So it's your fault. But when you can prove that this is happening at the same place, at the same time, in the same location, then nobody is going to check with all those women to say, were you wearing the wrong clothing or were you at the wrong place at the wrong time? So there is a problem. So you look at the data very differently. And that's the first part. The second part is, yes, we work mainly with corporates. In fact, Safecity has received only one grant from the Tata Trust. All our revenue comes from doing workshops with corporates on sexual harassment at the workplace. We also tap into their CSR funding. We've done workshops for their own employees in and around their offices. So we do safety audits and sprawls because we believe that corporates should not only protect their employees within the four walls of their premises, but they are also responsible for them to and from work. With an alcohol or beverage company, we are now going to launch hopefully next month, a Safe Bars program, where they've been focusing on responsible drinking. They focused on road safety, but they've never really focused on being responsible whilst drinking, as in the behavior within the bars or with women. So we are going to launch the Safe Bars program with them. And we are talking to several others to see how we can incorporate in their work too. And we've had a lot of success with the corporate community. Probably because I come from corporate and speak their language, it's easier for me to work with them. I hope I've answered your question.
Great, thank you. Okay, other questions? Yes, and if you could identify who you are and where you're from, that'd be great.
Thanks so much for the presentation. My name is Krista Bywater. I work at USAID in the Global Development Lab. So this is a very exciting project, and I was just wondering if the platform allows you to capture the multiple ways in which people are potentially harassed or the multiple forms of gender-based violence, and I'm specifically thinking about caste, religion, ethnicity, or perceived sexuality, or if you have seen any trends in the data. Thanks.
So if you go currently, thank you so much. So if you go currently to our website, you will see an odd category called Northeast India Report. So, the current Ushahidi crowd map doesn't allow for layering. So we had to add this category because, there was, so Northeast Indians, if you look at the map of India, Northeast India is kind of cut off from the rest of India, and they look different from the rest of Indians. They look more Chinese. So they are targeted because of their ethnicity. And there was a spate of violence at some point, and the community reached out to us and said, can we start mapping this? What is the solution? So we added that as a category. But in our mobile app, we will remove that as a category, and we have 3 new ones. They're not really categories. We will say, after you picked all the categories, we will say, was this because of your sexuality, which covers LGBTIQ? Was it because of your sexual orientation? Was it because of disability? And was it because of your ethnicity? So we are adding those. We also have been, there's been a request for human trafficking. I'm not yet sure whether that's a category that we should add, but we are thinking about what could be the best solution, because we don't want to put the person in danger by pinpointing a location. It's a tricky subject. So if any of you can help me brainstorm that option, I would really like your advice and guidance. But there has been a lot of requests to map human trafficking.
Okay, we're going to take one more question here in the room, and then I think we're going to go to the phone. So, Michal?
Hi, thank you so much for this terrific presentation. My name is Michal Avni. I'm with USAID and the IGWG. And a question that I have is whether Safecity has made any connections directly or indirectly somehow with health services, so information, referrals, etc., as a source of information and a sort of anonymous source of information, as well as through your community-based work.
Thank you, Nihal. So, so when it's anonymous, it's difficult to get back to people, but, we've been noticing that a lot of people have posted in the past, and not the recent past, in a lot of, like 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and the stories are in great detail. So what we've tried to do is put up resources available. We've also found that when somebody needs help, they actually write to us. So you noticed on the slide there's info@safecity.in. Pretty much every second day we get a person writing in. Usually that is a domestic violence case, or usually domestic violence, or it could be sexual harassment at the workplace, which means they need individual help. We don't necessarily offer them that, so we point them into the right direction with another NGO that does provide legal or counseling help based on their city and their need. And what we are intending to do now with, I've just constituted a legal intern team. They're going to look at common categories, and they're going to try and put together little pieces of information to say, okay, if you have this issue, this is the section of the law, this is the steps you would need to take, these are the resources you would need to contact. So trying to be proactive and putting it out there, even though we don't work on individual cases. So and that would be possible with our mobile app. So if you were to kind of report stalking, for example, then you would get a notification saying, hey, you just reported this, and maybe you want to look at this, and this,
Okay, one more. Hi, Hello, I'm Indira Sandelia from Partnership for Transparency Fund. A great presentation. I have one question about the your crowdsourced map. You seem to have more cases in New Delhi and Mumbai, and very few in Chennai and in Kerala. Is there any reason for that? Is it the number of incidents in these places, or is it the reporting or lack of reporting?
So no, we have a disclaimer on our site which clearly states that it's not because, it's like Delhi is the rape capital of the world or whatever. It's because we have teams on ground over there. So we do have teams in Delhi and Bombay, and that's why, like I did say, right, that most of these have come in through in-person reporting. And the rest, like Chennai, Bangalore, and all the other tiny towns and cities, and even if you scroll away from India, you will see random reports from around the world, including San Francisco, London, etc. Those have come in directly online, but the big chunks of data are through in-person interactions with people.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's quickly turn to the phone and see if we have.
I think that last question sort of addressed.
The last question addressed the one that you had. Okay, do we need to open it up for people on the phone at all, or are they coming in through they're typing them? Okay. Okay. Any other questions in the room for Elsa? Sure.
Hi, this is Amy from Partnership for Transparency Fund as well. I'm curious if you have explored a short message system, a way to text in reports, and what the pros and cons of that, adding that to the platform would be.
Thank you. So Ushahidi does have that facility, but we chose not to turn it on because the data would not have been clean in a way. We would, unless people knew exactly how to fill it in, like what happened, where it happened, date and time, it has to be in a particular format. It would either be meaningless, incomplete, or noisy. So we chose not to, and it's also expensive. Somebody has to pay for it. We weren't in a position to pay for it. So we didn't turn it on at that time. And I think with the mobile app, I don't think we need to turn it on.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Robin Dayton, and I'm with FHI 360. And I wanted to just ask a clarifying question. Also, when you presented the board that showed individuals making reports of violence against them, I couldn't tell whether or not they could respond to one another. If it was kind of like there was any back and forth after a report was made. And I was just curious if you have any issues at all with information as it's being shared, or if there is any back and forth with people feeling like, not that they're being blamed for what happened to them, but that they definitely should report to authorities, or they should, I find often when people are trying to be supportive of survivors, they give a lot of, here's what you have to do now versus, what do you feel would be useful to you? So I'm just curious if you could talk to those two things.
Thank you. So there is a comment section on each report. So if you've if you've submitted a report, you can go back and check out if there are any comments left. Now, we won't have any way of knowing if, unless they respond back on the comment, we wouldn't know if there's any further interaction because it's all anonymous, right? But we've seen people give tips and tricks. So for example, I know there was a lady who, said that she's from Bangalore, and she said that the 100 meters that she has to walk to her office from the bus stop is so dangerous that she feels unsafe. And there was a person who I knew, of course she wouldn't know that person, but that person responded and said, if you have any difficulty, here's the number, please call, I will send my office staff to help you. So I think, people, and then there were others, like somebody else spoke about groping and touching, and this other lady responded with her own incident and said, it happened to her. So she didn't put a report, she put it in the comment section. All of this, whether it's a report or a comment, goes for approval at the back end, and then the administrator approves it. So if you were to fill in the report, it wouldn't show up on the front end unless it was approved. And that's our way of screening out if names have been taken in the report section, if it's not a case of public space violence. So for example, we have a few cases of domestic violence, and we have a few cases of dowry demands. In India, we have this problem where women are targeted based on the dowry their parents give at the time, or parents don't give at the time that they marry. So those are never published because they are not relevant to our site. And wherever they leave their name and email, we try and get back to them because we feel then in those cases they are seeking help. But most of the cases that are public space violence, they are not in the moment, they are in the recent past or many years in the past. And if they don't leave any names or emails, it's difficult to get back. I'll give you another example and I'll be quick about it. We suddenly got a series of reports about a professor from a particular university in the city of Pune, and it was very specific. It was an astrophysicist. And I Googled his name, and he turns out to be one of the top astrophysicists in India. And he's won government awards. And one of the reports had an email. So we contacted the people and we said, listen, we've got these reports and we would like to know more before we publish them. And then it turns out that this guy was reporting on behalf of his friends who were women and who were studying at that university. Now, he wasn't even in the same city as them. So we asked him, can your friends talk to us, or can your friends contact us? And we would like to know what would they like to do about this, because we can approach their women's cell in the university, and we could also do it in such a way where we don't name them. We can just say, anonymous reports have come in. But he discussed it with his friends and then they chose not to go forward with it. But we did get back to them and give them those options.
Any other questions for Elsa? Yes, a couple more. Okay.
Hi, Elsa. It's Lorette Kakuza. Remember me? I'm wondering on the data you have past reports and current reports. Do you differentiate any way on the map the date of this so that you get a timeline for the incidents?
You have the time range, so you can on the site based on the time range. So for example, right at the top, so you can say change the date range.
Right, okay. Thanks. Hi, my name is Ahlam Gaze. I'm also with FHI 360. This is a fascinating presentation. I'm really blown away. I'm gonna check it out and learn a lot from it. My question is, since I work mostly on girls' education, preventing violence again, in schools, secondary schools, I'm wondering if the data that you have also can be segregated to show the percentage of reports that come from school-age girls from schools, because violence does happen also on school ground and around school grounds, and if you have any follow-ups for these reports, talking to the schools in particular about approaches they have to follow in order to make the school more safe for adolescent girls. Thank you.
Thanks. So when we started, we wanted to keep the form very simple with very few fields so that it didn't intimidate people from reporting. So we didn't track gender or age unless they told us in the reports. However, in our mobile app, which is, as I said, currently under development, we will be tracking those. So it'll be easier to segregate, okay, are men reporting? Because some men have reported on our site. I must say that I think 98% will be women's reports and a tiny percentage are men. But we would also like to map that, you know, because if you're talking about LGBTIQ, you want talking about disability or ethnicity, we want to know those reports too. Second is that we, you know, what I'm trying to do here is really facilitate the collection of this information so that anyone, anywhere in the world can use it to make their own neighborhood safer. I don't intend having an on-ground presence everywhere, nor do I have a big team. So that's why I am evangelizing this message, because I think schools should also be responsible in looking at this website and CrowdMap to see if their schools are a hotspot, or parents should be doing it. The onus of providing safe spaces is not just mine alone, it's everybody's. And if we can use peer review sites for other things like planning a holiday and, you know, booking a restaurant, why not for our safety or our children's safety? Having said that, we do workshops for child sex abuse in schools, and those are treated differently. We never publish those on our CrowdMap because we don't believe that should go on a CrowdMap, but we do escalate them to the school principals, and we ask them to, we provide recommendations, and you know, most of them are followed by them. In fact, for corporates as well, after our workshops, a lot of policy changes have taken place in corporates, and that is a great thing because it shows that, you know, lack of information on this subject maybe had, you know, got them now thinking, now that they were aware, they got them thinking more deeply about how to really provide an inclusive and safe environment for their women.
Elsa, this is Rose. I'm going to take the final question here because we need to wrap up and move on to the next speakers. But I did just want to ask, so it sounds to me that the technology, again, is very interesting and could potentially be adapted and replicated and implemented in other settings by other people, other groups. But it also sounds to me like the technology by itself isn't sufficient to, you know, run this kind of a program, and that you also need the data interpretation workshops with the community, and you need the workshops with the police and things like that. So I'm wondering if Safecity has or will be producing curricula or other materials that, you know, could be packaged as, you know, part of the Safecity program that others could then potentially adapt if they were to want to replicate something like this in other settings.
Sure, and we've already started to work with that. So we've already created some digital toolkits on how do you use the platform and how do you, you know, explain these concepts in your own community. So that is currently available. What we are also going to be doing is, you know, like a toolkit, how you can start a Safecity chapter in any part of the world, you know. So right from, you know, conducting the workshop, collecting the data, analyzing the data. If you need us to analyze the data, I have a data analysis team which would happily create dashboards for you. So we do that for our partners because they may not have resources at, you know, at their end for it. So we provide that support to them as well, but we will not be able to give you the context. So we can interpret the data, but we still need to sit with you and understand the context. Like, why is it happening in that space? So somebody who's familiar with that space will then have to look at it and see, okay, what is it about that space, you know? And even for the solutions, you'll have to look at that space or be familiar with that space or the cultural attitudes of the people in and around to figure out the solution. And that's why we can only facilitate the collection of information and, you know, make it available to people. But I think the involvement of the community is critical in the solution phase as well. Like, for example, take Kibera. We were wondering, okay, why is that hotspot showing up here And not why. Okay, so the hotspot showed up there, but what was the solution? It was near a mosque, so they could involve the imam, you know. But they went further and they analyzed, okay, who are these boys? These boys are actually juveniles who went to jail or whatever for petty robbery. They don't want to go to jail because they know it's not a great place. So they were avoiding that kind of crime, but they didn't know sexual violence was a crime. So the partner NGO made a compilation of the laws which listed, you know, sexual violence as a crime, went and educated them and said, listen, you don't want to go to jail for robbing people, but do you know there's also, you know, some amount of jail time if you were caught doing this? And they didn't know that. So it's the context, you know, in which it's occurring also that informs the solution.
Great. Well, let's give one last round of applause to Elsa. Thank you. Thank you again for joining us from India, and thank goodness the technology worked.
I'm so glad, yeah.
You are more than welcome to stay and listen to the other presentations and participate in the Q&A that follows, but you are also welcome to jump off if you need to do so. So thank you again for joining us. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Jen Curran. So Jen is a technical specialist with Measure Evaluation, which is a USAID-funded project. She is also from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And over the past 15 years, Jen has worked in 20 countries, setting up and managing research and implementing programs on a variety of issues: malaria, nutrition, security, livelihoods, M-Health, and PMTCT. And she has even started up a nonprofit to develop sustainable livelihoods programs in regions of high biodiversity. In addition, over the last 4 years, she's been working in Botswana to develop and implement a mobile phone-based GBV referral system with the government of Botswana's Ministry of Gender, and that is the work we're going to hear about today. So Jen, you have the floor.
Yeah. One second.
Nope, so actually, while we're getting the technology fixed here, we'll take just some quick clarifying questions after Jen's presentation, and then we'll have Ranit present, and then we'll open it up for the richer Q&A.
Yep. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to be talking, as Rose mentioned, about my experience working on and developing this project in Botswana. It's been, in September, it will be about 4 years since we kind of started this project and developed it, and we're just finishing up, as of July 31st, a 1-year pilot of the program. So we're not quite yet finished, so we don't have all of kind of the lessons learned and outcomes from it, but I'm going to kind of show you what we found along the way. And so my title, I was trying to find something that was a little bit more catchy than just implementing a pilot of something. So one thing in terms of our lessons learned, which I know we wanted to focus on more in these presentations, is that how sustainability, while it's fantastic, we actually found out that there is a point where it can be too sustainable, and I'll talk a little bit about that theme as we go along. Okay, I'm not going to go super into the weeds here because I know that we have limited time, but basically I worked for Measure Evaluation, and we got a request from the field office in USAID Botswana to assist the Gender Affairs Department, which is part of now the Ministry of Nationality, Immigration, and Gender Affairs, formerly Ministry of Labor and Home Affairs, to kind of help them with their GBV response. And so we went and did a scoping visit and found out that what they really wanted was this is the wrong slide. What they really wanted was to strengthen a very informal referral system that was happening throughout the country. But
just a couple of stats here. They did a GBV study in 2012. They're actually currently fielding another one now to kind of look back 5 years later and see how they've kind of responded to the problem. 2/3 of women in Botswana have experienced some form of GBV in their lifetime. Some of these statistics are probably not surprising. 30% of women experienced GBV in the previous 12 months when they fielded the survey. Most of these instances occur in intimate relationships. I think that's probably in several other places as well, with 3 in every 5 women experiencing IPV. What we also found, they also found in the study, and we also found when we went, is that care and support was somewhat fragmented, which again is probably not a surprise to most people here who've worked in that field. And loss to follow-up is huge. And so, yeah, we decided to go in. We did a scoping visit, found that, in fact, yes, it was very fragmented, and decided collectively that what we needed to do was help them build a formalized referral system, and also provide other technical assistance for M&E in terms of their GBV response. Another thing that we found, which I'll get to in the next slide, is that human resource capacity at the Gender Affairs Department, which is, again, most of these things are not surprising, it was minimal resources that they have in most government and ministries that we work with as the standard. And so when we thought about, okay, we're going to pilot this referral system, but the end goal of the pilot would be to scale up. Well, how do we make something that's sustainable that we actually think we're going to get good data from and that we can use? So with limited capacity of 3 or 4 people. So we decided that after many discussions that we were going to try a mobile approach. And again, there were many, many reasons why, and I won't really get into too many details, but I think one of the main reasons was that there was just a severe lack of human capacity to, anybody who's worked in data and data systems understands the mountains of papers and forms and registers that need to be collated and put together to even come up with a quarterly report for the last quarter that you can maybe use for the next quarter or the next year in planning. So we were like, there's absolutely no way we're going to be able to do that. It's just not feasible. We could set something up, but we're setting ourselves up for failure. So then also the infrastructure is fairly good in terms of technology there. So we thought, well, everyone's doing it. Let's do it too. We thought a little bit more about that, but we said it looks as though we're right here for something. Mobile phone usage is, everyone has at least 2 in the country. People know how to use them. They've been using these for a decade. So let's see what we can do. So along the way, we had lots of stakeholder meetings. We developed the application. We brought it to our national reference group meetings, all the national level stakeholders, and said, okay, this is what we're looking to do. This is what we think it's going to look like. What are your suggestions? What do you think? So there was a lot of collaboration, lots of meetings, and we came up with something that we thought we were ready to pilot. We had a phase 1, I'm using this kind of loosely, in April 2016, where we set up on the ministry servers the infrastructure and the software to basically hold all of the data. And then we initially trained about 20 institutions. And I'll just come back for a second. We have 2 pilot areas. One is in the north of the country and one is in the south. We have an urban or peri-urban area as well as a kind of a rural area as well. So we decided to train 20 institutions, kind of do our pre-pilot to be able to work out any issues that we had before we actually went and trained everyone. And then we officially launched August 1st of last year. Brief overview again. Okay, so talk about the technology. I think that's kind of important. I guess for me it's important. We're using what we call the brick phone. So again, we developed this for the very basic level, knowing that it can work everywhere, literally everywhere. I think the coverage of the mobile companies is 95% of all the areas in Botswana that have human development. So we developed it on the brick phone. It runs on GPRS, which is kind of essentially 2G technology. So 3G and 4G are kind of not, they don't really, they're a little, 3G exists in some areas, 4G is an enigma. We also use SMSs, and the SMS portion of it is to send reminders for initiating providers and receiving providers to kind of remind them that they have a new referral, or a referral is incomplete, please follow up with your client, et cetera, et cetera. So we set up a series of SMSs once the data is entered to kind of keep the providers moving so we can reduce loss to follow-up. EMRS is, we use this as kind of a system similar to that. We're not actually collecting, for the most part, medical data unless it's imperative for one provider to send it to the next. But we use it as a little bit of a case history. And one of the reasons we did this is that in our stakeholder meetings, we found that a lot of the ministry staff that was there said, well, what we find in our programs is that there's a lot of cases that we lose from one provider to the next, because if they're involved in a traumatic event, which most of these are, they have to tell their story when they enter the system. And then the next place they go, they have to tell their story again, and on and on and on and on. So we thought, well, let's see if we can incorporate something where we can at least collect some of that data that will follow the client from provider to provider to hopefully reduce that trauma potentially caused by it, as well as to make sure that the next provider understands where the client's coming from, and hopefully that will help with kind of quality of care as well. And we also have a web application. So for people who don't want to use their brick phone, they can use their laptops or any Wi-Fi enabled device. I won't go through in detail how the system works. It's just a little kind of infographic. A client can enter the system at any point, so in any institution. So they can go through, if it's a student, they can enter in the education system, or they can enter through the COPLA, which is the traditional system, or social worker at any point. The client's assessed and then referred on if they need to be referred. If they don't need a referral, they're already logged in. They're also logged into the system so that we can collect data on a number of GBV cases that are entering the institutions. Basically, it's uploaded. You upload the data on the phone or the web application. It goes to the server, and then it pings the next provider. You have a new referral, and then they will then go log on to their computer or their phone and download the case, and then on and on and on. So, other components of the GBV referral system, we have a dashboard that we can view current statistics, and this is mainly for the Gender Affairs Department, at least right now, but service providers have the ability to log in and see their own data. And we're just capturing very basic statistics on here, number of GBV cases that are entered at each institution, number of referrals that are initiated, and number of those referrals that are completed. And those are disaggregated by region, type of service, sex, age, et cetera, any kind of which way you want to slice that data, we can show that. And so there's more data that the Gender Affairs Department can see and use, but this is just a little bit of a snapshot. We also use these reports to give them back to providers on a monthly basis and sit with them and say, okay, does this match what went on in your institution last month? How can we change it, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a raw data feed, which is accessible really only to Gender Affairs Department staff. So I put just a little snapshot up here with no identifying information. They can kind of view, one great thing about using the mobile device, many, are that you can see live data, almost like in real-time data. So we know when referrals are initiated and when they're completed. So this allows us to go in and understand when referrals are completed or when they're not completed, and go in and say, okay, we've noticed there's a trend. Clients are going to, I'm not going to pick on the police station, but let's just say they're going to the police station, and we're noticing a trend that these are not being completed. So it allows us to then go back and investigate, is there a problem, or what is the problem? Is it just that clients don't want to show up for whatever reason, or is there a problem we can investigate? So that allows us to go through and see and try to find trends and respond to get those referrals completed. We also develop service directories, which is kind of the crux of this program, knowing all the providers that are in all the sectors, providing any sort of GBV services, where they are, who the people are, what their hours of operation are, all of that information for the providers to be able to know who would be a good person to refer to.
We also developed, in collaboration with another organization, standard operating procedures. So one thing we realized in the beginning was we can have people make all these referrals to new institutions, but if they don't feel comfortable knowing what's going to happen to the client of the next organization, then they may be less likely to refer to that organization. So we tried to standardize as much as possible for the various sectors, standard operating procedures in terms of case management, and particularly how a client will go through the referral system. There's just a quick snapshot here. We also developed these kind of simplified flowcharts that go along with the larger document, but that are posted in the different facilities so that people can understand a little bit better and don't have to go through that document and can refer to it as needed. Standardized training modules, this has been huge. No matter how many times we've standardized and we've done the trainings on gender-based violence, our trainings turn into half a day about discussing what is gender-based violence. So while standardizing necessarily hasn't changed that, at least we can go in with a unified message every single time. And so these training modules, all service providers get the same standard training for using the referral system. What is GBV, how to do a GBV assessment of a client, what are the main referral system pathways, who can you refer to, who should you refer to, our standard operating procedures, and support and technical assistance. We also have ongoing service provider support. We have monthly user group meetings, which we thought maybe were just going to be for our, really help us out to understand what we need to help the providers with and provide them. But the users actually really love these monthly meetings. They've made a lot of great connections this way. We also have subcontractors that are working on the ground, and so they follow up and do site visits with the providers to basically support them as we're going through this pilot. We have WhatsApp groups, which sometimes help to remind people when meetings are or to exchange information, and sometimes we get Tupac. So, but they have been really good, or, you know, various movies about soccer players and stuff. So they have been helpful, I think, in many ways, but particularly to connect the providers, which is, I'll point out, is a really important piece. And we put out newsletters and fact sheets, so we try to distribute information about what's going on in the pilot areas. Obviously, if we can't create demand for these services, then what's the point of doing it? So we have ongoing GBV awareness and outreach, as well as community education in all of our pilot areas to try to, so that people, and this includes what is gender-based violence, talking about gender norms, as well as to kind of promote that there is this new system, and while it's not a panacea for everything, we're hoping that it's going to help with continuum of care. Service providers for our pilots, we have, again, from all the different sectors that provide any sort of gender-based violence. Services, we've got 39 service delivery points in Machuti, which is our pilot area in the south. Artesia is the rural southern pilot area. We have 6 there. 61 in Maun, which is a little bit larger, and that's in the north, and 5 in Shirobe, which is this partner rural site. Okay, now we'll get into lessons learned. There were many, and again, we're not completely finished with the pilot. There's ongoing operations research that will kind of be all put together in a nice little package and talk about these things more with a little bit more data. But from almost a year pilot and almost 4 years of developing this project, we've got a couple. So again, you start with a theme that I started in the beginning, sustainability. So when I approached our subcontractor who was going to help us with the development of the application, I said, look, this needs to be completely sustainable. It needs to work everywhere, all the time, right? Everyone needs to be able to use it, no matter how technologically savvy or unsavvy they are. This is the #1 priority. So we built all of the database and the server on open source software. That way there's no who's going to pay for this, how are we going to do this, how are we going to maintain this. Open source software that's well documented and you can find anywhere. And we used what I call new old phones, like I said, the brick phones. We didn't give them old phones. We bought them new, but they're basically old, 10 years old. So we thought, oh, they're cheap, they're easy, they have the technology, that 2G that will work everywhere in the entire country, and there's less desirability to steal. I worked on a project many years ago
where every day things were being stolen, not phones, cars, everything. So we're like, for sure, no one's going to want these phones, which I'll get to in a minute. Again, 2G works everywhere, 95% of the country. We're currently working with Orange Botswana, who's provided some in-kind support for this application. And 3G doesn't. Like I said, 4G is an enigma. I've heard it exists. I have not yet seen it. And SMSs and predictive texts, people have been using those even in Botswana for 10 years. So we thought, all right, we've nailed it, right? We got it. It has a super small application size. Once we've put it on through a small micro SD card, it uses very minimal data, a lot of drop-down menus and radio buttons so that people don't have to type as much as type in the limits kind of errors in typing. Minimal data usage, under 1 megabyte a month per phone, and lots of people are just referring every day. Minimal SMS needed, again, small SMS packages. As well as you can use it on any internet application or Wi-Fi enabled phone. Okay, so then we actually, over the course of 6-7 months go by, we start having these user group meetings, and we find out, well, maybe we should have rethought this in sustainability. So small data needs, we thought this is great. We don't really need a lot of data, so we're going to be able to use this, it's just going to kind of work on its own. But then we found out that it was so minimal data that the mobile phone companies didn't see so much value in providing that in-kind support, because they're like, I guess we're giving you $1,000 worth of data, which is not something that they necessarily wanted to champion. They wanted 10,000, 20,000. So that we ran into some issues with that. Due to the low-tech nature of the phones, it's actually kind of difficult to get technical assistance when something goes wrong with the phone. Low data usage, we actually found out recently that, as many people know, like if you don't use the phone often enough, it will eventually get deactivated. So that happened. And we really found out that, they're just super uncool phones. And people would rather use smartphones than smartphones. So, yeah, and a little bit more cumbersome than, just typing on your iPhone or whatever. So. Again, while open source software was free and well documented, we found out that staff at the ministry was more trained in these proprietary softwares that were used around the ministries. Brick phones also get lost and stolen, which kind of just blew my mind a little bit. But and most people are used to smartphone technology and get a little frustrated with kind of the old school texting. So, I got to wrap up, I know. So government buy-in and support ownership of the system has been a challenge, and I think that the key to this entire thing working or not working, the government partners just need to show ownership and be visible and accessible all the time. They need to be the champions in the room. Even if they're not doing the training, they need to be there, and they need to show support for that. Really keeping stakeholders involved at all times, like it can help with accountability as well as to help respond to challenges if we're having them. TORs are needed for service providers. A lot of service providers said, oh, this is great, but it's not going to make TOR, so it's really not part of my job. So then you have to figure out how do you motivate people, which is a whole other topic for another day. Ownership of phones can be actually a little bit messy, and I think that goes into ownership of the system, buy-in from all stakeholders at the beginning and ongoing throughout constantly. Accountability, again, which is probably not a surprise. Consortium of partners can help collectively solve problems. Technical working groups are important, again, to try to work through some of these issues. And data use should be stressed as well. We found a lot of partners were super excited about this, and they're like, how do we get the data? How do we use the data? I'm running through here because I know I'm running out of time. Trainings and GBV focal people. One thing we decided to set up was, let's have focal people and kind of these champions at each organization so they can help be these accountability partners that we have. If we have a problem, we can go to them. And we found out that those champions might not actually be doing the groundwork, but that they're just as important as the people and the actual service providers using them. Service provider trainings and sensitizations need to happen early and concurrently. We can train all the service providers we want, but if the whole institution isn't on board and don't understand what gender-based violence is, clients are not going to get to the right people and they're not going to get referred. Standardization of tools is difficult, but critical. And again, never assume a trainee is actually trained the intended trainee. This is a huge part. Constant follow-up is crucial. Other lessons learned. I'm going to stop. Okay, I'm going to stop.
Do you want to do one wrap-up sentence?
Yeah, I think a lot of these, I mean, I was talking about relationships and just going through some successes, but I think this is the overall lesson for me when I know I was told that at the end you were going to get a question about what is the, what would you do different? And I would say that myself and probably my team got really bogged down in the details of why isn't this one thing working? And then spending all of your time trying to figure out why these phones have been deactivated. And not being able to step back and say, okay, what's working? What are the kind of the bigger pieces we're trying to have working here? Yeah, I hadn't seen the trees. I would say that that's probably the biggest lesson learned.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Very interesting. And I'm sure you'll hear about some of the successes in the discussion. That would be great. But stay here for just 1 second. Are there any clarifying questions? Okay, a couple. So Mihal first. I'm running that back to her.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if when the information about a client was passed from one provider to another, does the system recognize is it the name of the client, or do they get issued a number? How do you maintain the identity throughout the process?
Sure. So just to clarify, so the application is for credentialed users only, obviously. So each provider at different institutions have their own login and username and password, and there's multiple levels of data encryption. So when the service provider, the only person who can view the data is the initiating and the receiving provider. So they are able to see the name of the name and the contact information of the client, but no one else is. It's de-identified in any other way. Okay, there was another clarifying question in the back.
Hi, thanks so much for this. Pam Williston from ICRW. I have 2 questions. So for the purposes of this system, how did you define a referral and how did you define completion of a referral? That's my first question. And then the second one is just you touched at this a bit, but getting at the issue of like the burden of the system. Did this replace a paper system? Was it in addition to a paper system? Yeah, anything about that would be great.
Yeah, no, I'll do the last question first. So it was meant to just replace the paper system, which was not really being used anyways. We'd ask for a show of hands, and there would be 2 or 3 people in the room, and then we'd say, of all the rest of you, how many have actually received a client with a referral form? And no hands went up. So it was mainly to replace the referral system to paper form, though it had a little bit of mission creep along the way. And then the first question about, it's a great question, initiating and completing. So we counted initiation of a referral when the data was uploaded into the application and, saved in the application and then uploaded. So as soon as it hit the server, or the database that set up the server, it would be counted as one referral initiated. Similarly, it was only completed when the next provider entered the information. And that could be client never showed up. It could be any number of reasons why it was closed. But it needed to be closed. The data needed to be closed, basically, for us to count it as a completion. Great. Thank you, Jen. We are going to move on to our final speaker. So we have with us Ranit Mishori, who is a professor of family medicine at Georgetown University, just down the road, where she leads the department's global health initiatives. In addition, she practices full spectrum family medicine, including obstetrics. And in addition to being a physician, she also holds a master's degree in international health, and she also used to be a journalist. So another very diverse background that she's bringing to this presentation today. She is involved in lots of different things, but her areas of interest include health and human rights, refugee health, health disparities, global health education, and of course, health and media. So, Ranit, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's so exciting. This is the first time I've heard about your interagency group, and I'm so delighted that you're doing it. I'd love to attend some of the future meetings. I'm going to speak today as my role as a consultant for Physicians for Human Rights. It's an organization I've been affiliated with for many years, and I work with their asylum network as well as the program on sexual violence in conflict zones, which this is a part of. So just to give you a little bit of context, that the program on sexual violence in conflict zones is a program that aims to bring multi-sectoral teams, so medical, legal, law enforcement into the same room, kind of talk about how to address, how to document sexual violence. And the point of it is to eventually address impunity and increase the number of cases that actually end up going to court and get prosecuted. So as we started working in the DRC and other countries in East Africa in about 2010, we discovered that the evidence collection we had a lot of challenges with it. So first of all, if you look at this little thing, it's called a carnet. This is the medical record that physicians use in the DRC to document everything from, diabetes, hypertension, and sexual violence. And when we talk about a forensic medical evaluation, it's not a regular medical evaluation. You really need very, very specific details that will later help the prosecution. So this is what it looked like. There were some medical charts that started documenting sexual violence and the forensic part of it, but a lot of gaps in what was not documented. The forms and the papers were kind of thrown all over the place. Some had coffee stains, some had mud stains. I mean, really nothing that could be given to any law enforcement or legal expert. Nobody knew what to do and who's doing what. Even the language used between the physicians and the law enforcement officials and the lawyers people were using different language. One of the things I like to point out is my first session with the police. We talked about we looked at a document, and it said assault or injury at 3 o'clock. And injury at 3 o'clock for physicians means that you're looking at the vaginal orifice, and you know that it's you look at it like a clock. And then the policeman said, well, but the woman told us that the assault happened at midnight. So what's happening over there? So there was a breakdown of communication between these sectors. And then, this poor coordination. And one of the things, of course, if you've been to Eastern Congo, this is near the road to Panzi Hospital, if you know about it, with Dr. Mukwege. It's a little bit better nowadays, but even if you wanted to physically hand-deliver documents, there's even without any violence, which is still post-conflict, there's still a lot of violence. It's hard to get around. So the idea came up of creating an app. Of course, easy thing. It's an app, and you put the information in there. You put some forensic data, and you just click the button, and it goes to this legal system, and you're all done, and it's wonderful. So the DRC, we helped put together a very specific form after about 2 years of sitting together with those multi-sectoral individuals and kind of coming to an agreement of what should be in a medical forensic evaluation in the DRC, which is really different across countries in Africa and other parts of the world, and even across states and regions. But the Medicapt idea was using the one that we came up together with this whole group and enabling some sort of photography collection. And really kind of, these are the general ideas behind Medicapt. Of course, the idea is to be able to have successful prosecutions and eventually aggregate data and be able to report. And I'm not going to go through all the details here, but overall reduce sexual violence. Great. And of course, mapping was one of the issues that we wanted to achieve, the aggregate data collection, so we can report maybe in real time, especially from rural areas in the eastern part where there's still pockets of violence. And as you know, the DRC is known as the rape capital of the world. So a lot of horrific cases are still going on by the militia and other perpetrators. So the idea was initially very, very simple. But there are a lot of issues. So the ease of use, the cost, chain of custody. I'm a physician. I didn't know what that meant. But chain of custody, for those of you who don't know, it means that every step of the way when you deliver evidence, it needs to be there need to be mechanisms for nobody tampering with the evidence. So how do you do it electronically? How do you do it digitally in an app? It needs to have victim privacy, of course, if you were thinking about the type of information, the type of photography they're trying to enter. So, you know, tons of pictures of genitalia, a lot of really intimate, very, very specific information that people don't necessarily want to get out. And then ease of use and the network connectivity in that area was a huge challenge that we knew of, but we just didn't know how much. And then the security. So in some conflict areas, if you're a physician reporting on sexual violence, you yourself can be targeted, and the information can be stolen, your phone can be stolen. This is also something that we encountered when we spoke with some of our clinicians working in Turkey and Jordan, trying to kind of get this potentially moving in the context of the Syrian refugee crisis. Again, security was paramount, not only for the patient, but also for the provider. So just to kind of, we started, the idea came up in 2011. We received an award from USAID for the idea. We started out with very well-known online/app called MapPi that is sort of self-customizable. But it just didn't work. The first time we went to the Congo and trying to get all of this information into MapPi was just not working, and we had to engage a technology developer and create something completely new. The modular infrastructure is very important because what we initially created was only for the DRC with the specific forms that are needed in the DRC. So the forms in Kenya are different, the forms in Uganda are different. We're starting to work in CAR, this is completely different. So it needed to be very customizable, and you'll see why in a second. We field tested it with a small group of physicians in the DRC in 2015, and their feedback helped us create the next iteration of it. And we're doing M&E and constantly, and this is ongoing issue than printing, and I'm going to talk about in a second. So initially when we set out to create Medicap, the idea was we knew that was an area with either no or low bandwidth, really, really sensitive medical data. We're not talking about, you know, diabetes and blood sugar levels here. The physicians needed to be able to use it. If clinicians are not using it, it could be the best app, but they needed to be able to use it in the work as part of the workflow of their daily life as clinicians. The chain of custody, again, a huge issue of data tampering that I was not even aware of as a user here in the U.S. of EMR. We never have to do this. This is not something that came across as an issue initially. And of course, high security both for patients and the clinicians. So how do you create an app without mobile data? So again, I'm not going to go into all of the different technical solutions, and I wouldn't do it justice, but you know, we needed to create something that could be used in the field when there's no electricity and there's no internet, no Wi-Fi. Again, our tech guy figured it out, something called Couchbase. I can't even begin to talk about it, but so anyway, very complicated. But and then, how do you build a multinational regional app? So the first application is in the DRC, but it needs to be modular. It needs to have enough ability to be customizable to other countries and other settings. And even in Kinshasa, the forms are a little different than in the Eastern DRC. So how do you do that it's sort of nimble and doesn't require too much tech support and money? And then, of course, the privacy and security, again, there's some super duper encryption thingy that I don't understand. But again, this is constantly being updated, and we're constantly testing the hackability of it, which of course it takes individuals who are expert at this and a lot of money. So one of the things, if you think about your own phone, is when you take a picture, it stays on the phone. But this was not acceptable at all, because this has to go directly into the app, because you don't want to have, again, you don't want to have personal photography of people's genitalia or other injuries on the phone that could be accessible and by others and of course disseminated. As we know, nothing is safe on the phone, nothing is safe online or in the cloud anymore. So again, the tech gods that we worked with created this weird mechanism where you take a picture with the app from the app, it stays in the app, and it doesn't end up on your phone on the photo roll. And then we decided to use Androids. Again, a whole other discussion of why Androids and not iPhones, but we're not going to talk about it here. But how do you use it without internet, without power, and without sharing sensitive medical data? And it requires all kinds of hocus pocus that, again, I can't. And of course, some of the, so we're talking about three users. We're talking about the clinicians, the police, and the legal and judiciary system. So again, at each point, how do they know how to uptake it, where to get it from? Jen's referral system is very interesting to us because we're still struggling, because maybe the police, their tech savviness is not as good as the judicial system. So they may be able to use SMS reminders, but the lawyers and the judges may be able to use other systems. So we have to customize it based on the tech savviness of each one of these sectors. And of course, the chain of custody. So if you look at a medical forensic form that's and you enter it, and you can potentially change the information that's supposed to go to court, that's a no-no. So how do we make it, how do we make sure that everybody who has access to it, also we can have some sort of a digital stamp to know who accessed it, what time, what did they do with it, and to make sure that nobody was tampering with the data. I'm going to talk more specifically about the doctor role right now because that's my role within the project. And the foundational data is it had to work for clinicians. So it had to come from them. We needed to know not what we wanted it to be, but what they wanted it to look like and what kind of information, how the information was entered. It had to come from them, so the idea of co-design. And these are some of my colleagues from the DRC. So what are their needs? They had to help in the planning and development. It had to be incremental and iterative, so we would come up with, they would give us some ideas, we would come up with a version, go and roll it out again with them and see what they wanted and whether that worked. And most importantly, how it works with the workflow. So when you go to a doctor here in the United States, you expect to have a computer screen and that somehow the doctor works with your information and the EMR system. Often they don't look in, they don't make eye contact anymore because they have to click. But that's a whole other talk. We're used to using digital technology as part of our regular patient encounter. It's not used in the DRC at all. So this is a whole new idea of how do we use this thing. They don't even have computers or at all in their exam rooms. And is it not going to make extra work for you? So the first iteration, we found out that the clinicians actually filled out the paperwork and then went home and then typed for 2 to 3 hours. And so it created extra work. And of course, nobody, even with great incentives, was going to use that for the long term. So we had a bunch of focus groups, and I'm not going to go into details, but what are the must-haves, what the should-haves, and what the could-haves that the clinicians themselves wanted. One of the things that came up was that they wanted a pictogram. Again, we have to create it from scratch. Mainly, when you have this pictogram, when you do the physical examination, you put your finger kind of there, and it tells the system where in the body there's potentially some sort of a physical finding that you need to document. You can document it with a text, and you can also click another screen, another field, and it immediately goes into the super duper secret encrypted photo system, and it takes the photo off that same place. So you don't have to kind of go back and forth between the camera and the app. And there's satisfaction with the app. Every time you roll we have about 3 versions right now. We asked for input on the content and the user interface, about their perceptions about the usability and the access and connectivity in their specific location. And we had worked with clinicians from Panzi Hospital in Bukavu General, Goma, and small towns named Uvira and Minova. And again, it's different in each location. All of these things, especially the access and connectivity. So one of the first things, our first trip, we assumed everybody in the world knows about mobile phone. Everybody uses mobile phone, which is true, but 90% of our clinicians only use dumb phones. They've heard about smartphones, but they've never used them. So we came in with a big box of about 25 super new Android phones. It was really great, but they didn't know how to turn it on. They didn't know how to connect them. So we ended up spending about half a day, was unplanned, on just the use of a smartphone. And then so the tech savviness of the group in the DRC was really a big barrier that we hadn't anticipated. So we had to train them on how to use it to begin with, and then in general, how to use this kind of mobile technology, and how to use technology in the exam room. Again, this is not the US where everybody has a computer and you're kind of used to doing it, whether you do it well or not. It's a whole other issue. But technology does not exist in the exam room. So there's a patient and a doctor, and some technology in the US doesn't exist there. And there's a way, there's actually a lot of training that goes on, even in our medical education in the US, about how to kind of incorporate technology into patient care. Non-existent, so we had to develop workshops just about that. We did a lot of simulations with patients, simulated patients about using the technology in the room. And then the consent process, of course, when you do a medical forensic examination, you need to talk about consent. So am I okay taking this information from you? Am I okay transmitting this information to the police, to a lawyer? You know it's going to be discussed in an open court potentially. So the issue of consent, specifically with sexual violence, was incredibly important. But now you add a layer of, all right, well, this information is actually going to a cloud. Well, what is a cloud? Who might see it? How is it accessed? The clinicians themselves didn't know how to think about it, how to explain it to a patient, let alone the patients, who many of them, as you know, in this part of the world are very low literacy. So we had to create sessions just about addressing and practicing obtaining consent to use digital data in the exam room. Again, flow of the clinical encounter was really, really, really important. What we realized and what we found out, we were going in thinking this is going to be paperless, it's going to be fantastic, but everybody wants a piece of paper. And in some institutions, they need the actual stamp. So in Ponce Hospital, if you know Dr. Dennis Mukwege, a piece of paper on sexual violence cannot leave the hospital without an actual stamp, very fancy, from Dr. Mukwege upstairs in the other room, or not upstairs, but in the other part of the hospital. So the issue of printing became a whole thing that derailed our project by about 8 months to almost to a year, because we did not have the capability of printing from a smartphone or from a printer, or from a tablet. And in fact, when I did visits to these hospitals, there was only one printer for the entire hospital in each of these hospitals. So if you're in the GVV clinic and you wanted to do this, and you did it really well, and you needed to print it, you actually had to go somewhere else, but there was no way to connect the phone to that printer. So we had to design a whole new system for printing. Again, that's the tech guys are amazing, and it's still, but it really derailed the project by more than 8 months. And then behavioral issues. In focus groups, we found out that some of the other clinicians who weren't part of our project and didn't get the fancy tablets and smartphones were really resentful of the clinicians who did that. So again, behavioral issues are enormous. So I'm just going to end saying we're creating this with this framework, principle for digital development, and if you don't know about the MAPS toolkit, you should, because it's fantastic for M&E of any mobile health technology. It's really, really good. WHO and UN Foundation and other NGOs. And then we're still rolling it out in the DRC. We have another pilot coming out soon. We started assessing the health information system in Kenya, and we're about to roll it out in about 2 months. There's a pilot in Kenya, in Nakuru. The issue with Kenya is that it is much more advanced, so we're kind of bypassing the incredible institutional and infrastructural issues of DRC, where we're afraid we're not even going to be able to show that the app is great because there's so many difficulties. Kenya hopefully will be better. All the physicians we work with have worked with smartphone technology, and so hopefully it'll be a much easier rollout. And we're also trying to test this proof of concept in a less messy context with our asylum network, where it's all clinicians, American, US-based clinicians who actually use this technology all the time for our asylum and torture evaluations in the US. research and advocacy is sort of in the very early stages because the data that we have been able to collect right now is more about the quality of the intake forms as opposed to actually mapping and counting the number of cases. We're not there yet, but hopefully the next year or so. This is our team, and as you can see, we have a specialist in information security who kind of constantly has to run those hacking. He's inviting hackers from around the world to try to hack the system. It's really cool, just to expose the potential gaps because the information and the nature of it is so sensitive. And that's it. This is Karen is our program director, and you can direct questions to her or to me.
Any quick clarifying questions before we jump into the discussion? Charlotte?
Just one clarification. So on one of the slides that whizzed by, did it say that 10% was were male survivors of sexual violence?
We don't have actual numbers right now because the data that we've collected is very, very sporadic. But yes, of course there are a lot of male LGBTQI, but also males who are not, who are victims all over the world, so certainly.
Any other clarifying questions? Okay, so why don't I have Jen and Ranit, actually the both of you can sit up here with the mic, and we'll open it up for Q&A. Maybe share the mic. Oh, sure. That's a great idea. Yeah. Great. Okay, so the floor is open for questions. We'll start over here with Kate. Hold on, let's bring the mic.
Hi, Kate Gillis from PRB. And I'm just wondering what sorts of information you all have on the opinions of survivors, you know, and their experiences with those systems. I'm thinking that you did such a good job of explaining all of the challenges in your system, from the privacy and the chain of custody. But, you know, I think the photos question was what made me think about it and how survivors feel about, you know, unnerving to have a photo taken of such a, you know, sensitive area to start with. And I'm sure at least some of the survivors understand technology well enough to know, like, why are you taking a picture with your phone, and how they explain that and how they feel about that. And I think the same question would probably apply, Jen, to your system.
Yeah, so for us, again, this is it's going to be part of our investigation about the utility and efficacy of this intervention. However, sort of just anecdotally, the cases or the patient survivors in the DRC don't even know, they're okay with taking the pictures, but it's the idea of where it's going. But more importantly, it was, what is the doctor doing with a phone in the exam room? So it was even much more basic than that. One patient asked, are you on Facebook while we're talking about my rape? So it goes beyond at this point. So it's a very basic idea of what the technology's role is in the exam room. And when you think about this type of encounter, you want the physician to be very empathetic and make eye contact and you know, touch in an appropriate way. But when you're holding a phone or a tablet and trying to type, it really interrupts the flow of the physical of the encounter. So that's at the level that we're dealing with right now, and we can't even talk about, you know, most people don't understand that it's going to, you know, to a cloud, and then might go to they want their paper form, they want to take that from the doctor's office to the police, and then maybe to the lawyer if they have one.
Thanks. Actually, I'm nodding my head because we were having very similar issues. Again, also anecdotally, during our kind of our baseline and endline research, we're not actually, for probably ethics reasons, actually going to be collecting data from survivors. But we've had anecdotally from our service providers similar feedback in terms of kind of clients wondering, why are they texting their friend or something? Well, you know, and so we walk through that. Okay, we need to explain to them that it's doing this, it's replacing a paper form, and but they have gotten that from clients. So one thing we've kind of told the service providers are, look, you're the experts.
in your treatment and case management. So you may need to figure out what works best for you. And so we didn't want to blanket say, collect the data and then enter it into the phone later. So we basically said, this is an issue. Use your best judgment as providers to figure out when it's appropriate to do that. But we did have a lot of people. And then there was also the consent. They obviously had to get consent before they were able to actually make a referral. And we haven't had too many survivors or clients who haven't consented, but there have been some, mainly because they didn't really want their information shared with the next provider more than anything.
Other questions? Okay, Nora.
Other Mike.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, other Mark.
Mike.
Nicole's coming with it.
This may apply to both of you. My name is Lorette Kakuza, and I'm interested particularly because the police are involved, and in many cases, police are perpetrators. So how does that work?
Yes. That's all I can say. It's really, we're struggling with this. You know, not only sometimes they're involved, sometimes they're just a member of a small community, and if information gets to them, it can go out. They are also very much of a group with a low literacy, tech literacy and general literacy. So working with them as opposed to the clinicians and the judges on just using mobile data is going to be, we're just broaching it right now. There are a lot of issues, both institutional and issues related specifically to the levels of education and even language. I mean, these are going to be in French. Many of them don't even speak French. They speak Swahili or other languages locally. So again, a lot of issues, and this is another huge barrier, but you know, for everything where you mentioned, but also technically, again, the police stations don't have the technology. Maybe they have a computer that's 20 years old with no internet connection. So how does it actually go from the clinician's phone to the police? You know, is it going to use a PIN number? Is there going to be some sort of, patients don't necessarily have national identification numbers, and it's unclear who assigns the PIN number. So again, that's another issue of how to tag that specific chart, the specific evaluation and documentation. So big issue.
Okay, we'll pass it to Nicole, and then we'll go to Alon.
I can just ask the question. I'm Indira Sandalia from Partnership for Transparency Fund. It's a follow-up question.
Just so that people on the phone can hear you, can you?
Okay. I'm Indira Sandalia from Partnership for Transparency Fund. It's a follow-up question. Who has access to the cloud storage? Would the police have access once they get the PIN number and things like that? And that would be a little dodgy.
That is a very good question. So ideally in the future, it'll be, some sort of a federal or regional judicial system that will have access to it. Right now, PHR owns it, and this is one of our internal discussions. Like, what do we do? If you want us to be sustainable, you want to eventually maybe make it an open app anybody can use around the world, and customize it to themselves. But at this moment, we control the data, and we can decide where the data goes in terms, especially in terms of kind of aggregate data for reporting, for advocacy. But that requires money, that requires tech support, that requires somebody to actually manage the database. It's a small NGO. We don't necessarily have the resources to do it. Certainly not long term. So it's a very good question. There's the other thing that I didn't know is that if the cloud, for example, is in Kenya, there are some international laws about the transfer of legal data from one country to another, and suddenly, somehow, again, I'm not the legal expert on this project, but there are some issues with that, so we're working with members of the ICC to try to figure out and identify what to do about that.
If I may, there's also another problem. Once you finish with your project and you move on, what happens to that data there?
Right. So if it's,
all these projects have a time limit, and that they move on.
Right. So if it's owned by local institutions, local government, then we would be okay. But again, sometimes it's the government and the local institutions that are the perpetrators. So a lot of issues yet.
Sorry about that. Reality.
Let's go to Alon.
Hi, I'm Ahlam Kez with FHI 360. Thank you, Jennifer and Ranit. Great presentations on innovations in using technology for referrals. My curiosity is about whether you also, where you initiate these innovative approaches, whether you identify on the ground who is working on preventing GBV before it starts. You're dealing with survivors, victims of gender-based violence, and the system is great to have them go through referrals where they can get help, whether it's medical or judicial, with police reporting, all of that. But I want to focus more on what do we need to do at the community level to really have less cases for us, eventually to stop gender-based violence, and that's a huge fight. Again, as I think Rose initially mentioned, that we can't rely on technology completely. We still are working with communities that, even though technology is there, using the basic phone is still an issue. So you really have to, pull our sleeves back and talk to the communities about, where does it start from, and what is it that we need to do to lessen the number of cases. But for those cases that we know about, we need what you are doing. So are you identifying or working with or linking with approaches or programs on the ground that are focused more on, addressing that issue? Thank you.
That's a great question. So I think I touched briefly on it, that part of our, again, we're working with the Gender Affairs Fund who owns this system. But part of our approach was we have the community outreach and awareness activities that go hand in hand. They're half of what our subcontractors on the ground do. It's 50% of their work. And they use the SASA program for most of their community outreach, for community conversations. But we have kind of several levels of how we do that. And we have different peer educating programs that we do in both areas. Some edutainment, a drama troupe that goes out and does performances as well to kind of hit on all of the issues, such as talking about gender norms. And again, the SASA program, for many of you are probably familiar with that. You kind of start where people are, and then you move the conversation along. So that's half of what we're doing. And part of that as well is to kind of like plug the system as well. Like we're trying this new system out as well that we're hoping is gonna help with quality of care. But yeah, that's kind of half of what our job is doing.
And I want to say for our program, we work with a lot of community-based organizations, but we don't work on prevention. This is specifically for capacity building for documentation and appropriate documentation and admissible documentation that's admissible in court. So again, down the line, we hope that once we are able to aggregate the data and show that, this is what's happening and these are the perpetrators, we'll be able to slice and dice it by perpetrators as well, based on the patients or the survivors report, of course. So hopefully down the line, but in actively day to day, we don't work on prevention efforts.
I'm going to ask a question because I have the mic, and then we have to pass it along. So my question is, so you're both working with providers to adopt this new technology. You're focused really on documentation of proper evidence that can be used in the judicial system and your referral network. I'm just curious, the providers that you're working with, are they already really well capacitated in how to support a client who has experienced gender-based violence in terms of both the counseling that they might receive and the first line response, the messaging, as well as the other clinical referrals that they may need? For example, if a woman has been raped, is she also, are these providers already trained to, for example, ask her if she needs access to emergency contraception? Or are they referred for family planning services? Is that, I'm curious how well capacitated these providers are, and if there is capacity building in how you support a client who has experienced violence as part of your program?
Sure. Well, it's a great question because this project is part of a much larger capacity building project to train multi-sectoral teams. So what most of the work that I do is I actually work with clinicians about how to actually examine and document and identify the different types of injuries and stuff. This is just one part of it. So the answer is, in the context of the DRC, no, the physicians or clinicians themselves are not well trained in how to actually get this information. But the beauty of Medicapt is it also gives them prompts. So if in the past they would have to kind of run through this thing, okay, now I need to examine this, and now I need to do that, and this is called this and that, the Medicapt actually won't let you progress to the next field if you haven't filled out certain things. So it also serves as a prompt for what kind of information they need to take so that they don't forget.
Okay, great. So that's a great question. Initially, it wasn't part of our program to spend a lot of time on capacity building for providers. We kind of went in thinking, well, these are the experts. So, but there's several points I can answer there. We've had and we've heard from providers as well as just kind of anecdotally that there is a lack of these things, such as confidential rooms, even exam rooms, or if you're in the police station, you go to the CID desk, which is like the main person that you talk to, and then they basically refer you to another officer. We've heard that stuff sort of anecdotally, so in our trainings we touch on that. But I think one of the good things that's come out of this is that we have so much more data now than we did before. We kind of heard anecdotally, but now we know, in following up with providers that haven't completed referrals or talking to providers about like how the network is moving, we're finding more of that out. So we're hoping that we can then address it. Because we did, again, as we don't actually have the capacity, I don't think, to really talk to survivors about what their experience is. I think it's kind of more from an IRB ethics standpoint. We're not there yet, but we're finding that out, I think, through this process. And then as well, I mentioned briefly about these SOPs, these standard operating procedures. And one thing that we're going to be doing with this kind of the data that we're getting from this pilot is to take some of that information and see how we can address it in the SOPs to strengthen them. So, really putting a bigger session on ethics there, and depending on what sector you're in, what are the really important things if you're dealing with a survivor who comes in who's been raped or something like that. I think we have a question from one of our remote participants.
So we have a question from somebody who works at IRC, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute them. So Fabio, if you would like to speak, we will be able to hear you in the room.
Okay. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just had a question really about the forensics evidence piece, and just curious to hear a bit more about how the Ministry of Justice and prosecutors were involved in developing that tool. And I guess, and kind of tied to that also, to what is the likelihood that survivors will will be able to follow through on a court case? And I ask that because it is such a complex and invasive procedure for a survivor, and if it's not going to be used, then that's a serious thing to consider. So I'm curious how that input has been integrated and what input came from the Ministry of Justice. And then just one separate question is, what happens to the physical evidence? Because that can't be put on a phone itself.
Yes, great question. So in the case of the DRC, we worked with military justice to design the initial form that's required. So everybody was on board with the type of information that needed to come in. So it was completely with their input that this app and the form that led to it were put together. There are efforts right now, and with Kinshasa, and Madame Ubuntu is very much a supporter of this project, and so we do have buy-in from the ministry in Kinshasa. However, some unexpected challenges have come in from the lead chief medical officer in Kinshasa, who sadly decided that regular clinicians cannot get medical legal information because they're only for people who are trained in forensic medicine, and unfortunately there are only 3 of these in the entire country of the DRC. So we had to create a whole white paper about how regular clinicians family physicians and pediatricians and others can actually successfully collect this data. So there are always unexpected hurdles, but yes, in the case of the DRC, we now work with the ministry in Kinshasa, and for Kenya, we have full participation from the Gender and Reproductive Health Ministry in Kenya, so we're working with the Ministry of Health and already at the very, very beginning of this project, so definitely have buy-in from them. And the other question about physical evidence, so in the DRC, not a lot of it is collected appropriately, but it does get distributed separately, and that's one of the issues with the paper form, that it needs to go with a paper form or there needs to be a PIN number. But in reality, a lot of it is not being collected. This is something that we're addressing right now because clinicians, because of the training we're doing for Medigap, are finally learning what they can collect and what they should collect. So this is going to be something that we're working on moving forward. With Kenya, there are government-operated what's called chemists offices where the data is being sent to. Again, usually it's sent with the paper form, so I suspect this will have to continue to be that way, but at least they'll have the digital form to alert them that something else is coming. As we're doing the needs assessment, we're discovering, we've done it in several hospitals just this past month, it's just finished, we discovered that a lot of the actual physical evidence is actually not being transferred anywhere, and we've, our consultant there just sent a report the other day, just like in the U.S., that a lot of these kids just sit there and collect dust. So that this is something we've just found because of the work on Medigap, so I don't know how to address it at this point, but certainly a gap that needs to be addressed somehow.
Okay, so we're going to go to Debbie and then Robin, and then go Morgan.
I think it was just for her application.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Debbie Caro from Cultural Practice LLC. I think the improvements in quality of care and type of information that you're collecting to both experiences at the upfront or input level, it's phenomenal. But like the previous caller, I'm very much concerned about what the accountability is on the output end with the judicial sector. In terms of accountability, are you connecting through either the Ministry of Women's Affairs to the justice sector for collection of data on how many cases make it through to prosecution, and then how many actually result in some kind of verdict and then some kind of action that follows on the verdict? Because otherwise, there's really no accountability. It's just generating all this new information that has forensic value, but then isn't really being used to stop some of it from the other end, which isn't prevention directly, but certainly as there's more prosecution, that builds a kind of awareness that this is something that will be addressed judicially, and that might be a deterrent.
Absolutely. I must say that in the DRC, some of our earlier supporters are three very powerful military justices, who one of whom has now moved to Kinshasa and as part of the leadership. So it is definitely at the core of our M&E program is to collect that kind of data, because that's the whole point, is to make sure that not only are these cases reaching the courts, but that they're being prosecuted, and then kind of trying to figure out what it is in terms of the success of these prosecutions. But also there's the issue of the ICC. Sometimes these cases, especially of rape in the time of war, they don't necessarily end up in the local courts. But if we have this information, that could be later collected and sent to the ICC for sort of international prosecution. So either way, we've been working with members from the ICC on this project, and they have an ongoing project in collaboration with the WHO on this kind of data collection. But absolutely, this was key and foundational that we work with the justice system, and we have really great collaborators and partnerships with the justice system.
I have a shorter answer, but we, in terms of accountability, we now, I believe, through this pilot, because before this pilot there was nothing, there's no data being collected at all about gender-based violence. So we're hoping that through this, we have now data at the end of a pilot and of course going forward as it's scaled up to be able to bring back and say, okay, what's the problem here? So while we aren't currently addressing it as we go along, other than bringing our monthly reports back to all of our providers and saying, okay, let's look at your data. Is this correct? Like what's happening here? And having those discussions, we're hoping that we will have this data at the end of the pilot so that at a more of a national level, we can be like, okay, this is what we saw. Like this is a snapshot of what's happening in your country. And there's going to be, that's going to be an issue as well because we know anecdotally that most of these cases aren't getting closed at that level. So we're hoping that what we get from this pilot can be used for that.
Yeah, so thank you both. Both of you raised at the beginning of your presentations this kind of assumption that adding technology would be useful, right? Like everyone's doing it, apps are so simple. And I feel like, you've accomplished great things outside of the technology through both of these in terms of data collected and capacity built. But I'm wondering if at the end that you're going to have the ability to also help others decide kind of go or no go on adding technology. Because even just this question of hacking, I've never thought about, like, for the life of it, you have to engage hackers around the world to try to break into your system. And, like, can the government of DRC pay hackers around, even just ethically, do we have that capacity? So are there, is there a checklist? Is there something that you all can generate after you're done that helps a country or a province or whomever decide, this seems like such a good idea, but is it actually?
I'll take a stab at that. So I think, yes. So again, we actually did, I know when you mentioned stamps, I was like, I sound like a broken record when I talk about everybody likes to stamp things. So we knew that was going to be an issue, but I think we decided that the mobile solution, again, for the main reason that the human capacity, and again, and maybe I'm harping on this because I've been in the routine data collection. I've seen the stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of stuff. The human capacity just wasn't there for that, so we kind of figured it's either going to happen or it's not. So I guess, yes, I probably could go through a checklist, I guess at some point. I'm not sure if I have the time to do that, but yeah, I definitely think that there's been a lot of lessons learned about it, and I still, even what I know now, I would still go this way. If I had to do it again, I would just do it differently and approach it differently. But yeah, I definitely think there's so many lessons learned, and yeah, that I could at one point I could give me a call and I'll walk you through it.
So I think technology has a lot of issues, and I'm saying that as an American-based clinician who hates her electronic health records. It drives me crazy, and when I quit clinical medicine, that's going to be the reason. Nevertheless, this is here to stay, and so we might as well do the best we can considering all the challenges. And the fact is that, even though it's not great and sometimes it's not very efficient and it has its issues, that's what everybody's using, and then you have to use it. Just like EHR, just like if it's not on Twitter, it's like it never happened. You can hate Twitter, but that's kind of where the discourse is going these days. So you have to adapt to what's out there. And I can tell you that despite all the difficulties, I was reminded by that, look at the forest. The paper, at least specifically from our perspective, many challenges, but the paper forms are so deficient. And as you could see, the way it was done before, it's so bad that even making it a little bit a little bit better, with a ton of problems, is better overall for the big picture and for achieving accountability and reducing impunity, blah blah blah. There's always going to be stuff even with the best intentions, but it's better than what was there before.
Okay, we're going to go to Lori next. She's had her hand up for a while. Okay. Thanks.
Lori Krieger from the Nanoff Group. This is a question for both of you, actually two questions. One is, you alluded to, Ranit, does it have to be a physician? Is who's the clinician who does the exam in both places? Because there aren't that many physicians around. And the second question is a follow-on to what Rose asked, which is I realize that the two of you they're great talks. They're really good projects. But the two of you are concerned with the judicial system, but a referral. But the question is, in your bigger project in care, what other kind of care and support are the victims getting or the survivors getting?
And I wonder, particularly in DRC, you may not know this, where there's been hundreds of years of horrific sexual violence. How do women and men too usually deal with this? And then how can the system fit into it? How does the system fit into that in the capacity development? Thank you.
So, sorry, let's let them respond, and then we'll take your question.
All right, I'll answer the second question first because I kind of forget the first question, which was about the providers. Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. No, so I kind of, I use clinicians and providers interchangeably, and it actually is clinicians in general because we are training nurses to collect this data as well. Community health workers, I'm not sure, again, have the education, but certainly nurses, there are specific nurses that work on GBV, both in the DRC and other parts, and in Kenya. So it's clinician, it's not just physicians. As far as resources, again, in the DRC, there aren't as many, one of the biggest gaps everywhere, but especially in the DRC to some extent in Kenya, is mental health support. So there are some NGOs that work in that in this area, specifically for gender-based violence. So again, this is part of our training, is to kind of recognize what's out there and what are the resources that clinicians can refer their patients to, but we're not necessarily participating in any of this training. Part of the training that we do provide, however, is on recognizing the mental health consequences of rape and sexual assault. So as one of the issues with this form is, it needs to collect a lot of data, but we specifically put in, some questions about what does the patient or the survivor appear to, is she in distress, and what kind of, to a specific assessment for mental health presentation at the time. They don't always present acutely. Sometimes they come in years later or months later, and also addressing the issue of depression, anxiety, and PTSD. So we're trying to raise awareness among clinicians that that is a huge issue, and maybe make links to community-based organizations.
Okay, so in terms of our system, we have providers from a myriad of different sectors. So again, any that provide any sort of GBV services. So we have the traditional leaders and the traditional courts, police, public prosecution, magistrates' offices, primary, secondary schools, Department of Social Protection, so social workers and community development officers, and all the CSOs and NGOs. I don't think I'm forgetting anyone. But we went in and basically said, okay, here's what we're doing. We know you all are working in gender-based violence. Who else do you know that's working in gender-based violence? And kind of did that over and over and over again until we had this kind of near complete list of providers. So, and then some of the providers, such as the social workers, as well as the people from the clinics and the clinicians, already had some sort of training for their specific sector, particularly the Ministry of Health, who has their own SOPs for clinical management of GBV. So, and I think you asked specifically who's doing the exams. I believe they're, just to touch on that, I believe they're the physicians do. We probably have more physicians in Botswana than in the DRC who can do that. And basically, if someone comes into a health post or a health clinic, then depending on the severity, I mean, if it's rape, domestic abuse, I believe, can be handled there, but rape goes to the tertiary facility. And so, so they would be seen by a physician for the exam and accompanied by a police officer. And so I think in terms of having all of those providers involved, what we really wanted to do was that it was kind of a scattered network of providers, and they kind of knew each other, but we really wanted to we really used as much time as we could to bring the providers together. So again, they kind of built trust with the different providers, so that, and also got a better understanding of what they were going to get if they sent a client to another event.
This is super helpful. My question was a lot about community-based organizations and your connections with them. So sort of related to that, what are your relationships with survivor advocates at various levels, who community-based organizations that would advocate for survivors in court at more of a policy level, including people who provide legal aid or pro bono support? and yeah, access to information, the information that's collected, medical, forensic, for those providers.
I think in the context of the DRC, it depends on where people go to. So, you know, Ponzi Hospital, where Dr. Mukwege works, is a well-known center in East Africa for gender-based violence. So they have a clinic there that is specific for GBV, and it has a legal clinic attached to it in a different building, but kind of work together. So some of the referrals come from the legal clinic as opposed to just women going directly to the medical clinic. So, but this is not the same in some of the rural hospitals that we work with. So again, it's hard to, and there are not as many resources, so it's hard, but whenever possible, we invite some of those advocacy groups to partake in the training, in the multi-sectoral training, and create partnerships specifically to Kenya, where we do this training. We invite tribal leaders sometimes to the training. We've invited non-clinical, non-judicial, non-police individuals to attend some parts of the training that are not technical. So yes, there's an effort, but again, for the project itself, we're more, you know, we focus more on the capacity of clinicians and you know, the legal system to actually come up with the documentation that's appropriate.
So I talked about earlier that we have this huge network that includes CSOs and NGOs, and we're actually quite lucky because providers, and two providers that we have in both networks of our pilot areas are nonprofits, and they help with the outreach activities, but then they're also providers in the network. And one in particular, both of them have backgrounds working on gender-based violence, some more with youth and others more with adults. But one of our subcontractors who's doing the outreach, they are survivor advocates. So they will, and again, this isn't across the board. I think we probably see that more in the NGOs and the CSOs, but they will accompany a client if they feel it's necessary to the police station, to the hospital, to the you know, to the social worker or wherever it is. And I think because of that network building, people now know them as that if we can't do it, if we feel like this client needs someone to go with them here or there, and we can't do it, then we're going to refer to Women Against Rape because we know that they'll do it. So I think that hopefully that answers your questions. We have them. I don't think it's across the board, and I think it's just those kind of special folks at the special institutions who say, it might not be my job, but it's really important, and then they see that importance, and then they do it. And now other people know in that network, so they will bring a client there. So that's how it works.
And similarly, I just want to say that we have a very, we place a large, we make great efforts to create a network of clinicians so that they come together and meet, and they have means of, not just clinicians, but anyone in that multi-sectoral, multi-sectoral workshops across the country, and doing a train-the-trainer processes right now, both in Kenya and the DRC, so that there can be sustainability, but also serve as a network for individuals, survivors, or other NGOs and nonprofits from the area. So right now they have those kind of grassroots connections and community-based connections. So again, the idea of a network is really, really critical to the multi-sectoral training that we do. Again, and those networks meet even when we're not there. They're periodic. There's a local coordinator both in the DRC and Bukavu and in Kenya, and they create, they conduct meetings and check in with our partners on an ongoing basis. So it's not just us from DC and New York and Boston flying in and out. So the idea of network and community-based support is absolutely there.
Okay, if there's one more question, we can take one more. Do we have one from the phone? Or from your, okay, Colin gets the last question.
Maybe this was answered while I was using the restroom, but you know, I think our first presenter, Elsa, talked about gender-based violence primarily, or a lot of the times happening to young girls and adolescents, and you know, young women under the age of 16, and how I was wondering how projects like this sort of address, you know, people who don't, you know, young people who don't have the skills or the knowledge about what this means or what's happening to them, and how projects like this, even maybe it doesn't address that, but like how you can imagine what a project like that how that would work for young women and girls. If that makes sense. I don't know.
Under 18.
Yeah, under people.
So I can say that from our perspective, first of all, it's not only girls and women who are victims. So we make a very concerted effort to always mention that it's not just women, it's not just girls. However, the identification and examination of a pediatric patient under 16 in some cases is very different from the adult. So we do specific training for people who will be evaluating the pediatric population. And then every time we do a training, we also try to highlight specific vulnerable groups. Even though there's a huge amount of bias, implicit and explicit, about sex workers being victims of sexual violence, LGBTQI populations, males in general. So again, I think we are training the police officers and the judges and the magistrates and the physicians to recognize that these groups should not sort of fall off their radar screen and should get the same type of treatment, the same type of forensic examination, be referred to the same services as women and girls, which are the sort of more traditionally. We're talking in the DRC about babies being raped. So, I mean, that's a whole other source of unbelievable work that we have to do there and that we've been doing. But we're talking about grandmothers, 80-year-old women who are raped. So there's yes, the numbers or the statistics are more for the sort of young women, but it's just an entire spectrum of genders and ages, and that is certainly something we try to highlight.
Just to echo that, that's something as well that we make sure to make a point of, is that it's not just women and girls. We know that statistically that's going to be a higher percentage, but we stress that all the time, and we do see the data coming in where we do as well have people all over the spectrum and all ages as well. So there's pretty clear guidelines in Botswana, and maybe I shouldn't have said that, but I think probably relative to a lot of other places in terms of procedures at different institutions and sectors for dealing with a minor. A lot of that has to do with consent. And we also find that a lot of the, not all, but a lot of the kind of under 18, under 16 clients that we have come in generally come through the education system. So we've been working a lot with them. They have like a fairly complex structure and how they deal with kind of case management of a report of some sort of abuse. But we're really trying to focus on that. We know that they will come in from various sectors, but we're trying to focus on that as well. But I think that most of our providers, again, have been trained in how to deal with kind of minors in that regard. Okay, we have to bring this session to a close. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, first of all, to our speakers. All of you for your very active participation. That was really great. Just in closing, I want to go back to one of the things I said at the very beginning, which was, I made this glib comment that it had been 3 years since our last event on this topic, and that's, in the world of sort of technical innovations, that's a really long time. But I think what I was struck by was, you all have been at this work, your particular projects, for a very long time, several years now. And while I think, digital health innovations are constantly emerging, a lot of them die on the vine before they get as far as you have. So great job for getting this far, and good luck getting the rest of the way. And I just want to comment, I know both of you are going to have evaluations planned, you're going to have more data coming out of your pilots, and we will be very eager to hear what those data say. And I think, Robin's question about how do we know that this is in fact something we should be investing in and we should be scaling up, is a good one. And I think a lot of it, again, is going to need to come back to this evidence that you're hopefully going to be generating as part of your efforts that tell us, actually, we can have a really positive impact on these different outcomes if we do this. The investment is hard, but it's worth it. So we'll be looking forward to seeing those data. And again, thank you all for coming. We're going to draw to a close. I think wanted to share a few more things.
So first, mark your calendars for June of 2018 to hear someone just handed me a sheet with principles for digital development, sort of 9 commandments that were drawn up by donors based on 300 organizations. And you've covered a lot of them, but I'll upload it when we upload your presentations, and you can take a look at these. And
Yeah, and that's one of my slides, and I think it's a really, really great roadmap of what you need to think about.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. So thank you, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.